Everyone has heard of no contact, disappear, block, go silent. For years it looked like the ultimate power move, but right now, watching this, you already know something's changed. Nobody panics over your silence anymore. What used to be a strategy is now just expected. And expected never lands the same way twice. You block someone and they post a selfie an hour later. You vanish and they don't even seem to notice. This generation learned how to perform indifference. So the weapon you keep reaching for is empty, and somewhere underneath you already suspect it. Almost nobody talks about this part. Real no contact was never about disappearing. It's about being fully present and still completely unreachable. It's looking someone dead in the eye, calm, with zero need for their approval left in your body. You're right there, laughing, talking, existing in the same room, and none of it touches the thing you already rebuilt inside yourself. That's the moment it breaks. Not when you vanish, when they realize you're still around and you're simply not theirs anymore. The whole game only worked while you reacted, while you begged, while it hurt. Now you're fine. And there's nothing more unsettling to someone who counted on your pain than watching you not perform it anymore. Your real silence was never in letting a call ring out unanswered. It's in not needing to answer at all, not proving anything, not explaining yourself. It lives in the calm that disarms, in the smile that unsettles, in a lightness that somehow weighs more than any scream ever did. You didn't disappear. You changed shape entirely, and nobody saw that coming. Disappearing became a trend. Living well stayed rare. Your evolution is the thing that actually bothers people, not because it's loud, but because it stays. You're the living reminder of what could have been, and every time you show up whole, without chasing anyone, you leave a trail of regret hanging in the air behind you. So consider this an invitation to see the game for what it's become. Whoever wants to be unforgettable doesn't disappear. They just start living in a way the other person can no longer reach. There was a time when simply going quiet was enough to wreck someone's whole week. Stop texting back. Silence the phone. That alone used to be destabilizing. But time passed. People adapted. Disappearing turned into the most predictable move in the book. Anyone who's used to causing chaos has already built up immunity to your silence. It's like a magic trick everyone's already seen behind the curtain. Once the mystery is gone, the trick loses its grip. What was once confusing becomes obvious, and obvious doesn't hurt anymore. Some people actually want you to disappear, just so they can keep telling themselves you were the problem all along. And the second you fall for that, thinking you're finally in control, you're just following the script they handed you. But there's one thing that still messes with their head completely. Your presence, not any presence. That specific, calm, unreachable kind that doesn't beg for anything anymore. The kind that refuses to play, that doesn't react, doesn't explain, doesn't perform. It just shows up and it shines without asking permission. Picture running into them somewhere unexpected. You don't say anything sharp. You're just there, relaxed, smiling like nothing ever happened. And underneath, the person who underestimated you starts quietly falling apart because they can't understand how you're doing so well without them. That confusion eats at people harder than 1,000 arguments ever could. How do you even explain someone who used to beg for your attention now barely seems to register that you exist? How do you sit with a look that no longer flinches, but also no longer opens up? That's exactly where the mind starts to spiral, because what actually hurts isn't your absence, it's your presence with nothing behind it anymore. You're right there, but you're no longer available. You answer, but you don't hand yourself over. You listen, but nothing moves you. You smile, but nothing lights you up inside. And that contradiction is where the real impact lives, because while they braced for silence, you responded with maturity instead. Nobody has a playbook for that. It's easy to deal with someone screaming. It's easy to deal with someone who vanishes. But how do you handle someone who no longer needs to be cold or run away to make it clear it's over? The honest answer is, you don't handle it. You just quietly suffer through it. Your detachment turns into a mirror. It shows exactly what they lost, exactly what they let slip through their fingers. And by the time it clicks, it's already too late, because what you offered from the heart, they didn't want it when it was in front of them. This new version of you, more grounded, more whole, more owned by nobody but yourself, doesn't accept scraps anymore. And the strange part is, you never had to announce it. Your energy already said it. Your emotional absence speaks louder than any goodbye letter ever could. You became distance while still standing in the room. It's like you're a page they've already turned, still bound in the same book, but no longer part of the current chapter. They can search between the lines all they want, and they still won't find a way back in, because now you're the closing line. Classic no contact only works while emotion is still on the table, but once peace shows up, the whole game shuts down. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly in his own private notebook. You have power over your mind, not over outside events. Peace was never the absence of noise. It's the absence of need. The moment you stop needing to prove anything to anyone, you become a puzzle nobody can solve anymore. The real shift is this. This was never about punishing someone with your absence. It's about illuminating them with your presence, a presence that no longer drags old chains or old ghosts around, one that doesn't need to be understood, only respected, and doesn't need to walk away because it's already unavailable even standing right next to them. It's when you show up at peace that people finally feel the damage. It's not your silence that wrecks anyone. It's your lightness, the kind that belongs to someone who owes nothing anymore. It's your calm turning into something louder than a scream. Your expression says it all without a single word, because now your calm is the verdict. Whoever used to say you always overreact or you take everything too seriously, now has nowhere left to stand, because you don't react anymore. That silence they used against you has turned into the counterpunch, coming from your own steadiness. So if you think disappearing is still the move, think again. Disappearing is predictable, and predictable doesn't scare anyone, it just confirms what they expected. What actually unsettles people, what actually stings, is the surprise of seeing you still there, unchanged on the outside but completely out of reach on the inside. And this version of you doesn't apologize for changing. It doesn't apologize for no longer fitting anyone else's expectations. It just lives. And living in peace, with nothing left unresolved, teaches the biggest lesson anyone can give without saying a word. I forgive you, but I'm not going back to the version of myself I lost trying to please you. So the question left hanging in the air is a different one. If disappearing doesn't land the same way anymore, what actually works instead? If this pattern feels familiar, here's what I've noticed. Watching a video about it rarely survives contact with an actual notification at midnight. The Complete Stoic System is the guide, the daily practice, and the overthinking reset bundled together, built for that exact moment instead of the moment after. It's linked in the pinned comment. There's a moment when everything shifts. It's not the moment you decide to disappear, it's the moment you stop reacting. When the anger fades, the nostalgia stops stinging, and the silence stops being a strategy and just becomes who you are now. That's the actual turning point, because your emotional distance becomes stronger than any outburst ever was. Every silence used to feel like a held breath, full of hope, waiting for them to notice, to come back, to look for you. Not anymore. Now the silence isn't waiting for anything. It's clarity. You're at peace, and that peace strips away every emotional weapon that used to work on you like clockwork. It's like someone let go of the rope in a tug of war, and whoever kept pulling just falls flat. Without your reaction, there's no fight left. Without your need to explain or justify anything, all that's left on the other side is confusion. They'll keep testing you, pushing on old boundaries, dropping hints, playing with distance, betting you'll fall for the same tricks again. But you don't bite anymore. Because what actually changed wasn't the game. It was you. You're still right there, and that's the strange part. Present, visible, active, but emotionally untouchable. Like you learned how to breathe calmly in the middle of a fire, and now you just watch from a distance, not with contempt, just with neutrality. And that neutrality hits harder than any punishment ever could. A simple example. Watching those 3 dots appear and disappear used to steal your sleep. Now you don't even feel the urge to respond. Because the silence isn't a tactic anymore, it's a symptom. A symptom that you're just not emotionally there the way you used to be, and that thing simply doesn't run your life anymore. It's like walking into a room where everyone's dancing to a song you can't hear anymore. It doesn't bother you. You just don't dance. And that quietly wrecks the fake harmony they used to count on out of habit. Your calm starts to bother the people who relied on your chaos. Because your emotional distance now exposes a dependency they use to deny out loud. They swear it doesn't matter to them. Their behavior says otherwise. What used to be provocation is now just a failed attempt at contact. This new version of you isn't cold, it's clear-headed, and clarity is brutal for anyone still living off illusion. Some people try to resurrect what already died just to hold on to control. They test you, provoke you, vanish and reappear, all to check if you still feel something. But when the answer comes back neutral, just a calm, that's fine, their whole sense of power starts crumbling underneath them. Anyone who thrives on emotional manipulation needs your reaction to survive. Respond with anger, and you're still feeding it. Go silent out of pride, and you're still playing. But respond with steadiness, proving nothing, just living your life, and you shut the entire system down at the source. And that's what actually stings. You didn't disappear, but you're not really there either. You didn't cut contact, but there's no way in anymore. You're present, but out of reach, and that's devastating for someone who assumed they'd always have access to you. All that's left now is a body in the room and nothing emotional behind it. This new presence of yours doesn't beg for attention, doesn't scrape for scraps. It just exists, and because it's so calm, so mature, it becomes a threat to anyone still stuck playing games, because it proves you can be right there without ever needing that old connection back. The silence now carries no tension, just lightness. It just is. And that quiet presence turns into a mirror, one where the other person sees themselves alone, lacking, insecure, and slowly realizes the control slipped away a long time ago. And when they try to come back around, they won't find that same open heart waiting. They'll find someone who changed the locks, someone who rebuilt from the ground up, someone who no longer carries the weight of who they used to be. This new version doesn't leave gaps, not out of spite, but because they finally learned how to protect themselves. You're not being cold, you're being clear, you're not punishing anyone, you're just respecting yourself. And there's no comeback for that. There's no argument against someone who chose to take care of themselves, and no control left over someone who no longer needs to explain a single thing. That's the real emotional win. Real distance was never physical. It's internal, and once it settles in, there's no going back because it was never about creating nostalgia. It was about finding peace. And once that peace takes root, everything that used to feel urgent quietly becomes the past. And the past, no matter how loud it gets, has zero power over you anymore. But there's a part of this nobody sees coming. Nobody wants to say this part out loud, but it's real. The pain of looking someone in the eye and realizing you're just not there anymore. That the door closed, that access got revoked. You still smile, still respond, still show up. But underneath, there's simply no way through anymore. And the cruelest part is that this absence is visible, real, impossible to ignore. Because you're still right there, just in a way that no longer offers any emotional ground to stand on. No more reactions, no more explaining. None of that old habit of softening things, justifying yourself or trying to understand the other side. A sharp comment used to be enough to throw you off. A calculated disappearance, a little game for attention. That used to be all it took. Not anymore. Now all of it just bounces off like a rock thrown at bulletproof glass. Nothing lands, nothing shakes anything loose. Because the key that used to unlock you simply doesn't fit the lock anymore. That's exactly where the pain starts to settle on the other side. First discomfort, then frustration, then full-blown desperation, because whoever thought they had a handle on your emotions realizes the manual disappeared entirely. You don't respond in tears anymore. No more endless explanations. Now you respond with silence or something plain and neutral, the kind of calm that belongs to someone who stopped seeing the point in rowing a boat that's already sinking on its own. And that's unbearable for someone who counted on your intensity, because the absence of emotion reveals exactly what nobody wants to face. It's over. There's no room left. That visible presence of yours isn't an open door anymore. It's a wall that doesn't budge. They'll try to provoke you, drop hints, disappear then reappear, fake indifference. But everything that used to make you shake now just feels like a cheap rerun. Once you evolve emotionally, the old pattern loses its grip completely. It's like watching a movie you've already seen a dozen times. You already know the ending. None of it lands anymore because your mind already left that story behind. Now you just observe. with the calm of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. And that creates a whole new kind of pain for the other person, because where they expected you to chase, they find an emotional absence they can't explain away. You became presence without access. What should have been simple physical distance turned into an emotional canyon. They can see you, but they can't reach you anymore. And that stings worse than any final goodbye ever could, because a goodbye closes the story. This kind of visible absence keeps the wound open, keeps reminding them of what was and what's never going to happen now. That quiet pain never shows up on social media, but it's there in the eyes, in the disguised anxiety, in the attempt to look in control while everything slips away. You notice the looks, the little gestures, the attempts to catch your attention. But you decide not to react anymore, not out of pride, out of something closer to wisdom, because nothing changes if you lower yourself again. You're no longer accessible, because now being with you requires something the other person simply can't offer yet: emotional maturity, respect, honesty, real presence. And until that exists, you're still right there, just completely out of reach, because your self-respect became the new boundary line. That boundary isn't aggressive, it's quiet. Being firm doesn't mean being harsh, it means being clear. And right now you are clarity itself, a clarity that stings, because everything that used to work on you simply lost its power. There's no point chasing anymore. This was never about time, apologies, or regret. It was about process, and you already went through it. There's no road back once that road led you somewhere else entirely. And the irony only gets sharper from here, because the further you drift emotionally, the harder they try to close the gap. There's something devastating about watching someone bloom without you, especially when that person used to be your safety net, your escape, your emotional certainty. You watch them smile, and that smile doesn't include you anymore. It's not looking for approval. It's not asking for comfort. It just exists. That's the moment the ground starts to disappear from under someone's feet, because the lightness you're carrying now weighs on the pride of anyone who thought access was guaranteed. Nobody prepared for losing something they assumed was already theirs. You still show up, but not with that old tension, that hunger for validation. It's a steady, honest presence now. Just you, whole, finally at peace. And that peace makes people uncomfortable, because it's the result of an internal process the other person never lived through with you. A solitary road built out of pain and self-awareness that got you here, to the place where self-respect stopped being the exception and became the norm. You used to show up carefully, cautiously, trying not to bother anyone, trying to be accepted. Not anymore. Now you walk into any room like someone who already knows they belong there. And even without saying a word, your posture says it all, because the confidence you carry now can't be ignored. Your eyes don't beg anymore, they don't search. They don't try to convince anyone of your worth, they just observe. Calm, present. And that unsettles the people used to your old version, the one who pleaded, who folded. Commanding the room here has nothing to do with arrogance. It's about presence, how you carry yourself, how you walk, how you respond. Your energy shifted, and anyone who knows you can feel it. You're not pretending to be fine anymore. You actually are, and that difference shows. It's not a performance, not a mask. It's real. It's like you finally dropped the weight of needing to please, of understanding someone else more than you understood yourself. Now you chose yourself, and that alone demands respect. You don't need to say you moved on. The way you exist already says it, not out of pride, but out of truth. Someone who's genuinely light on their feet doesn't need to stomp. Walking is enough, and your path now leads inward. That lightness you carry now weighs heavily on the person who lost you, and that's the strangest part of all, because it shows the contrast. You used to carry the whole relationship on your back. Now you carry yourself. You used to hold the connection together. Now you hold your own peace together. And that shift stings whoever always leaned on your effort to keep it standing. This is exactly the kind of shift the Complete Stoic System walks you through. Not just the mindset, but the daily practice behind it. The guide, the daily practice tracker, and the overthinking reset, bundled at 45% off for anyone following the channel this week. Details are sitting in the pinned comment. It stings because they used to see you as fixed, guaranteed, someone who'd always be there, even falling apart at the seams. But now you're whole, and someone whole doesn't bend the same way anymore. No coming back, no begging, No adapting to just anything. You choose where it's worth showing up now. And that scares people. You became the kind of presence that commands respect with a simple good morning. Because your energy already says it all. I don't belong to anyone anymore. I belong to myself. And whoever expected to see you chasing now finds themselves wondering what happened. The answer lives in everything you no longer bother saying. It lives in the silence that doesn't wait for a reply anymore, in the laugh that carries zero tension. You're whole even alone, and that stability wrecks the ego of anyone who used to rely on your instability to feel secure. The more you genuinely show that you're okay, the more obvious their own failures become. You used to cover for them, make excuses. Not anymore. Now you just exist, and that's unbearable for someone who used to lean on your effort to keep everything standing. But that quiet transformation still holds one last surprise, one nobody sees coming, and it changes everything. You still go to the same places, same streets, same coffee shop, same friends. But something shifted. Your energy no longer grants entry. You're right there, visible, present, but nobody quite knows how to approach you anymore, because your calm became a border, and that border is sacred now. A sharp word used to be enough to pull you back. Not today. Today you look, you understand, and you don't react. Reaction gave way to awareness, and awareness doesn't negotiate. This isn't about pretending you're fine anymore. It's about actually being fine. It's about no longer losing yourself trying to be found. You just stopped giving anyone free access to what you carry inside. Your distance now is strategic, but not out of revenge, out of self-respect. What used to be open territory is now sacred ground, and to enter that space now requires something rare, earning it. The old urgency is gone. You don't rush to fix what's breaking anymore, because whoever wants to stay doesn't need to be held down, and whoever needs constant reminding never actually saw you clearly to begin with. It's like your whole system got a new password installed, and whoever tries the old code just gets locked out. That needy, always emotionally available version of you doesn't exist anymore. You didn't slam any doors. There was no yelling, no dramatic speech about revenge. Just calm, that kind of calm that unsettles people, that quietly stops being available the way it used to be. You didn't walk away, you just stopped being accessible. That confuses anyone who assumed you'd come running the second they snapped their fingers. You used to come back out of impulse, out of fear. Now you only come back by choice, and conscious choices aren't forced. They're earned. Revenge was never the point. But your evolution became the loudest statement anyone's ever made to them without a single word, showing exactly how far you've come and how much the other person lost by never learning how to take care of you properly. You don't knock on the wrong doors anymore. You don't chase people who ignore you. You finally understood every gesture you give away is energy, and you're done wasting it on people who don't know how to receive it. Now everything you do carries weight, because you're not doing anything for attention anymore. You act only when it's genuine, when there's reciprocity, when there's depth. Everything else stopped tempting you. People still try to figure you out. Why you stopped chasing the way you used to? The answer is simple. You learned how to walk on your own, and that turned out to be more than enough. You became a walking example of emotional control, not coldness, but maturity. Someone who finally understood that peace isn't negotiable, that not every reconciliation deserves the effort, and that sometimes the sharpest form of getting even is simply living quietly with dignity intact. That new energy you carry can't be manipulated anymore. It doesn't respond out of fear or chasing acceptance. It responds from truth, and truth doesn't bend under pressure. And that steadiness triggers something nobody on the other side expects. Pride keeps most people from saying this next part, but here it is anyway. Watching someone who used to be your entire universe and realizing you're not even a footnote in their story anymore. That person's right there, living, smiling, moving forward, but you vanished from their life while still standing in plain sight. The cruelest part is this. They didn't block you, they didn't confront you with rage or a big dramatic final speech. They just changed, quietly, internally. And when someone changes on the inside like that, even the silence shifts tone. You can still catch traces of their presence, the same places, the same friends, but something in there just isn't yours anymore. The connection that used to exist turned into distance, and somehow you got left outside of it, without even noticing. They used to think control was permanent, that all it took was coming back around, sending a vague message, and everything would spark back to life. But nobody expected you to change the locks entirely. That's exactly where the truth starts to sting. You weren't the one who drifted. They were the ones who stayed stuck while you kept evolving. Your absence isn't provocation. It's a consequence. The consequence of someone who healed so completely, they stopped settling for patchwork solutions. You're not playing games anymore because you don't need to prove anything. The people who knew your old self don't recognize this version. They braced for outbursts, for begging. Instead, they find silence and peace. You didn't become difficult. You became someone who no longer allows invasion, and that scares people whose only way of connecting was through control. The emotional freedom you built stings people, because it exposes how stuck they still are in old cycles, how much they still need control and approval. Meanwhile, you're breathing easy, living without needing validation from anyone. That lightness wasn't free. It came after plenty of falls, misread silences, long nights of reflection. But it's yours now, and it's priceless, which is exactly why you protect it fiercely, not with walls, with discernment. Your steadiness makes anyone who only knows how to live at war deeply uncomfortable, because being with you now requires actual maturity, one that shows up in how you stopped insisting, stopped trying to convince, learned exactly when to walk away from a whole chapter before it swallows you whole. They look for traces of your old self, that old emotional urgency. But none of that's left. In its place stands a presence so calm, it commands respect without a single word. This was never about pride. It's about awareness. That silence, when it comes from healing, isn't empty. It's protection, and protecting yourself isn't a lack of love. It's self-respect in its purest form. Whoever looks at you understands, even if they'd never admit it, that insisting and provoking don't work anymore. The door isn't locked, but it's not wide open either. It got replaced entirely, and whoever wants in has to become someone new too. You're not punishing anyone. You're prioritizing yourself. And that confuses people because it's not a war. It's not a game. It's a decision. And real decisions don't need noise to take effect. They just happen, and they quietly change everything. What happens next is the part that actually lands, and that's exactly where the real impact begins. Some things never fully leave you, and one of them is the feeling of losing someone who's technically still around, someone who still smiles, still shows up, still crosses your path, but that smile isn't for you anymore. That kind of loss doesn't announce itself loudly. It just sits with you deep. Every time you show up whole, every time your laugh sounds light in a room that used to be thick with tension, something breaks quietly on the other side. Because seeing you happy without them is the punishment nobody planned, and it stings worse than any calculated silence ever could. They didn't expect this. They expected more tears, more begging for attention, more attempts to come back, but you didn't. You didn't explain yourself. You didn't slam any doors loudly. You didn't leave a note. You just kept going, and the echo of your absence is still ringing far too loud. You never had to erase anyone. You just stopped shining where your light was being wasted, and that left shadows, left gaps, left questions with no answers, because the cruelest thing was never someone disappearing. It's someone staying visible while no longer being available. That kind of presence carries weight. It leaves a mark, a scar, because it shows up every single day as a reminder of what got lost, of what got wasted. And there's no going back, because what used to be spontaneous is now a choice. And you chose to keep moving without making room for someone else's drama. That choice was never announced. It was lived in the small details, in how you now respond calmly, avoid pointless confrontation, stop rushing. Everything about you became a signal of an evolution nobody expected, and one nobody can stop now either, because you're no longer open territory. Nobody gets in anymore without earning it, without care, without effort. There are gates now, invisible walls built out of dignity, clarity, maturity, and whoever doesn't get that will keep knocking on the wrong door forever. You're not out for revenge, because you understood living well beats any bitter comeback, and you're living with lightness, purpose, honesty. And that life you're quietly building, piece by piece, is exactly what unsettles anyone who once tried to make you feel small. If you're ready to actually build this instead of just watching someone else describe it, the Complete Stoic System is still linked in the pinned comment, the guide, the daily practice, and the overthinking reset, all together at 45% off while it lasts. Because they expected to find you in ruins. Instead, they found you rebuilding. And for anyone who thought they knew you, that's unbearable, because there's no room left for them in this new version of your reality. No way in, no way to influence you, no way to control you anymore. You armored yourself with maturity. The biggest form of getting even is this. You're whole now. You're selective now. What used to knock you off center doesn't even get close anymore. What used to consume you doesn't even touch you now, because you finally understood what you deserve and you refuse to settle for anything less. And that certainty in your eyes is impossible to ignore. It unsettles people. It commands something. It closes chapters with a single calm gesture. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. The same respect that used to get denied to you without anyone even realizing it. People look at you like they could still get that lost time back. They can't, because the time you spent trying to please someone turned into awareness. And awareness doesn't go backward. It only moves forward, only rises. And whoever didn't keep pace just got left behind. You don't need to dim anyone else's light to shine anymore. You shine on your own now. No audience, nothing to prove, no trophies to chase. And that quiet glow lights up the pain of anyone who never valued you when they had the chance. A pain that doesn't scream but stays, and it stays because you left behind the hardest mark to ignore. An absence that's felt every single day, right there in the presence of someone who used to be everything, and today is completely out of reach. So tell yourself the truth. How much longer are you going to use silence as a shield instead of a release? How much longer are you going to believe disappearing equals strength when the real power was always in staying without ever handing yourself over the way you used to? Maybe what you actually need right now isn't to disappear. It's to change your energy, change your response, change the value you carry into every room. Because whoever's still begging isn't commanding anything, and whoever's still trying to prove what they feel stays stuck in connections with zero room left for anything mutual. You already tried everything. Long messages, disappearing, blocking, going quiet, none of it worked. You know why? Because they're not scared of losing you anymore. They'll only feel something once they realize they already lost you, and that only happens once you genuinely change and keep moving forward. Are you going to keep waiting for them to notice you're gone? Or are you finally going to make an impact with a presence nobody can access anymore? Are you going to keep reacting to the same tired emotional games? Or are you finally going to live a new version of yourself, one with no room left for whoever broke you into pieces? Maybe today's the day you understand that no contact was never really about who disappears first. It's about who rebuilds their presence so completely, so calmly, so out of reach, that the other person genuinely has no idea where to even try to get through anymore. Because everything vulnerable already got sealed shut with maturity. Their pain doesn't start when you disappear. It starts when you show up and you simply don't belong there anymore. When that old emotional key stops opening any door at all. When the game stops having any effect whatsoever. And the new rule is simple. Nobody gets access to what they never bothered to value. And if this kind of reflection speaks to you, follow the channel. This is exactly the kind of thing we go deeper into here. So ask yourself honestly, are you actually ready to turn the page? Or are you still waiting for someone to notice your absence while putting your own life on hold? Because if you want respect, it starts with you. Stop offering yourself up where you already got discarded once, and show back up as someone nobody can ever catch again.